Rudy, for those that haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're going to talk about today.
My name's Rudy Dajie. I'm a PharmD. And today I think we're going to talk about businesses that are existing. So not just going in and starting up from scratch, but walking into a business or buying a business and what you can do differently to grow that business.
I always thought the business that I would buy is what I would do is I would drive around town. I'd find out where the business owners live. Then I would see if they're in a decent enough house, in a decent enough car, and I'd maybe do the Zillow stuff, and I'm not saying I'd do this. This is what I would do. I would do the Zillow thing and maybe try to find out how much, if their house is right side up, how much money they owe. I don't know if you can find all that stuff out. And then see if the business was not up to my standards of what I would do, not up to the standard of my ideas, dirty carpet and dirty windows and, that kind of stuff. Then I would say, oh, they're making a profit. Then I'd go in and buy it and then make a bigger profit. It must not be a good plan because I've never done it, but that's the idea I would have.
I don't think that's a bad plan. I'm not sure about the whole Zillow stalking thing, but I think that should sort of be your thought process when you go buy a business. When I look at businesses, and I think it's across in anything that you do, because I think all of the things I do are a business and they're just different businesses. So whether I'm looking at buying a commercial property or I'm looking at buying a pharmacy or coming in and helping somebody with an established pharmacy, it's looking at all those different things like, oh, how is the carpet and what are their cost of goods and what is their revenue and what do they do really well and what do they not do really well, and are they overly diversified? Is there something that they're doing that's really profitable and they should look at doing more of that? And then you look at their, sort of their expenses, and then you look at things like, is this being done out of convenience? Is their business being run out of convenience for their lifestyle, or is their business being run to be competitive? So if the CVS across the street closes at 9:00, but you want to close at 6 because that's convenient for your lifestyle, well, then you should understand that there's a sacrifice there. Whether you see it or not, you don't know the business that you could potentially be losing, or out of convenience for yourself, but people may not be telling you, or you may not see it. I see that a lot too with business owners, is that they structure the business around what their, lifestyle needs are. And, the business is a child. You have to, it's a living, growing thing that you have to really put a lot into, and you sort of put in what you get, you get out what you put in sort of raising and nurturing that child. And, I think a lot of folks are like, I really want work-life balance, and I think you can work towards work-life balance, but I think when you initially are starting something, the balance is more towards work, and you really have to focus on that if you really want to grow that business and be successful. So
it seems profitable to go into a business that you can see needs work, but I suppose there's some businesses that you look at and you can't think of how you would run it better. It's good hours, it's good location, everything looks good. They're just not bringing in enough profit. On those, it seems I would kind of scratch my head and say, well, what can I do more or better? Because it seems as fine as they can be.
That is a challenge, right? And then I think that's where you're probably going to pay a premium for that business, right? Because and you're not going to have a tremendous amount of upside, but you're going to buy stability, right? So it's like it's like buying a building that is a 5% cap that's got a McDonald's in it in a 30-year lease. Well, that for the next 30 years, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get that rent. But you're not going to have a lot of appreciation, and you're not going to really have tremendous upside, but it's almost like buying a bond, right? So you're really buying a bond at that point, and you have stability. So that's kind of like a business that's sort of capped out would look like to me. And I would obviously try to find in any business, like, how do I grow it? How do I get more out of it? But to your point, for me, I always try to look at something and say, is there upside? And that's generally where I look for value, is in a business that's underperforming, but I can easily see what I could do to make it perform. And then you obviously know that there's upside. So if you paid, $5 million for that business and it's, barely break even business, but you can see that you can add 10% and, the business is doing 10 million in revenue. Well, you know that you can add another $1 million in EBITDA by just doing a few different things. I think that's sort of the smart approach to looking at opportunities.
Do you feel you can get all of that from the books that they're going to show you, or do you not trust those? Or even if you trusted them, what other things do you need to look at besides just the numbers that the current owner gives to you if you're interested in the business?
No, I think you got to get a feel for it too. And I think you got to ask a lot of questions. For example, are they, say they're servicing, a nursing home. Ask questions like, well, do you service the entire nursing home? Oh, no, there's actually, we only service like 30%. There's multiple pharmacies in there, okay, well, why don't you service all of it? Like, why don't you have all of the beds, right? So that's an easy win. It's the same amount of deliveries, just more business. So I think you have to really kick over stones and really dig into things and ask lots of questions.
That might be a case too, where it's not an upside, it's a downside. They might say, well, we used to have 100%, but now we're down to 30 because this new such and such came in. So I think it tells a lot, probably both ways.
Right. Then you could also look at it and say, all right, well, if I buy this business now, then I'm actually probably going to have erosion of what's already existing, right? Or you can make some assumptions. I think a lot of forecasting assumptions go into things that I look at, and I try to sort of be thoughtful about them. I would say I'm like very much obsessive when I'm interested in a business, or if I'm going to help somebody develop a business or grow their business. Before I even meet with them, I'll have pages upon pages of thoughts, ideas, notes, questions, things that could be done potentially to better their business. Especially after even like looking at the P&L or looking for things within the P&L, but then also asking about bed counts, or, if you have an agency, you don't have all of the agency, or, do you do DME? Does it make sense to do DME? Are you losing an opportunity? Are they using another pharmacy that does DME? So you've lost that business. I think that you just have to think about what the upside and downside opportunities are. And I think a lot of people are very short-sighted in their business model, because I would deliver 3 hours one way, and sometimes I was delivering a DocuState, and people are like, well, that's crazy, man. Like, how are you going to make any money doing that? And I'm like, well, it's not about that one delivery. It's about the fact that I'm going to, cycle all these medications over a month, and we're going to deliver a lot of medications to this facility, but you can't make money. You don't necessarily, you got to look at the big picture, and you don't always make money every single time for every single thing.
When you're talking to, I'm just going to call it an owner, someone that you're buying something from, do you ever pick up that they're lying, and what protects you from that? Anything?
I think there are many variations of the truth. So I don't necessarily think that people are like purposely lying, but consider that they're trying to sell you their business, right? So they're not going to always tell you the good, bad, and the ugly. They're going to spend a lot of time talking about the good, just like if you were trying to sell somebody your car. But I think you have to be shrewd enough to ask the questions and then sift through the information and then ask for more information. When I bought my business, I asked for lots and lots of information, and I took a lot of time in digesting that and making decisions, or making the decision that it was the right business for me to buy. And I think that you have to get enough information that you have to be comfortable in saying, like, you got to take the plunge. If you're looking for 100% of the information, and you're going to look, and you think there's an oracle and you're going to know the future, you're never going to make that leap. So I think you have to get comfortable enough and then be willing to take a risk. And then be adamant about the fact that you are going to be successful, that you're willing to do whatever it takes. And I think that if you don't give yourself an option out, that's a lot better than when I think people are like, well, if I can't make it, I can't make it. Like, don't give yourself an excuse, But I think that people lie to you. I mean, I'm sure I've met with owners and I'm trying to help them help their business, and they lie to me because it's embarrassing, right? For sometimes the things they find are embarrassing that they don't want to talk about, because let's be frank, as owners in an independent environment, we kind of put up with things that other businesses, CVS, Walgreens, corporations may not put up with, because ultimately in the end, not having that person or that person leaving or dealing with that issue is always our issue, right? So it has to, and then we have to deal with the recourse and the repercussions of the issue too. So sometimes a lot of, we don't want to make those decisions or deal with those problems. And then I'll point it out, and then it's so they sort of make excuses for those things, or we make excuses for those things.
What's an example of that? Kind of the elephant in the room?
I mean, it could be a key technician.
That's very valuable, and that's like the whole heart of the business, basically.
Right, but the person's taking advantage of them, or they make whatever it is, or they're just not, or they're not giving the right level of service, but they think that they're doing a great job. So, I mean, I'm sure we've all come across that, where we're sort of putting up with something that we don't necessarily fully agree with, but we look at it and go, well, I'm getting 80% of the good that I need, but I'm willing to put up with 20% of the bad. And especially in this environment, I mean, this environment's tough. Finding staffing and people that want to work, and the other challenges that technicians don't, it's not their education, right? So they didn't go to school, they have a college degree and spend lots of money to be a pharmacy technician. So if they can go make more money laying bricks, like, what's the reason not to? I, at my peak, had, 45 delivery vehicles and, 90 drivers. I could only imagine, in this environment, trying to staff that.
I don't disagree. Why would you think it's harder now than when you did it?
Yeah, I think there's a supply and demand issue. I think that there's, just like we're in an inflationary environment, compensation has been inflated tremendously as well. And, and you can start at Target for $20 an hour. I think that there's just a lot more options out there. And I think that there's not a lot of people that want to work, or they're in businesses where they can work remotely. And I think it's pretty hard to run a pharmacy where somebody's working at home. I can't have them fill that prescription at home, or deliver it from their house. So I think we're not in an ideal environment to be competitive in those spaces. And it's a tough business, especially a volume business. If you're in a volume business and you're retail, so forward facing, that's a tough business for people to be in. And they could have other options where they don't have to interface with the public.
You, at one point, in one of the businesses you owned, you had 200 employees. And as I think about what maybe you didn't like about your day, if you think back to what was the most stressful part of your life when you had that company, for me, it's like a no-brainer. It's like, you just said it, Mike, the 200 employees. But when you think back to the days of your business, what were the biggest stresses that you're glad you no longer have?
Well, yeah, I mean, number one is employees, right? Staffing and employee issues, or they're vital. They're a vital part of the business, and also one of the hardest things to manage and control in the business when you think about all the different facets of your business you want to control. And so you can't make them come in, and you can't make them not quit. You can't make them not find another job. And those are all tremendously difficult things that you have to continue to manage, right? And if somebody quits, then you got to replace them, and it's always a challenge. But even when staffing environment was very different, it was always a sort of my number one thing that kind of kept me up at night. And then when somebody did call in, or somebody was sick, or somebody has to go on leave or maternity leave, or all those things that absolutely people should go do and are deserving to do, it would just create more, stress for me to figure out like how we're going to cover it and what we need to do for those things. I've always enjoyed the people I've worked with and people I've hired in my business. But when we were smaller and we had this sort of motley crew, like the people that just got it done, and we were much more aligned. And I really enjoyed working alongside those individuals sort of back in the day when I first started out. We had this young crew, and if it was snowing and people couldn't get to work, they would call me, and like I had a truck and I'd pick them up, and, they're more than willing to come in. They had this sort of this commitment. And, I don't expect anybody to be anywhere near as committed to the business as I am, because obviously it's my business. But it was really nice when we had that crew of people that were really engaged.
Did you have direct association with all of your employees, or did you have like an HR middle person that you had hired?
At a certain point in time, I did bring in an HR person. We had bookkeepers. We had lots of folks that interfaced. But for the most part, it was like, if like our corporate structure was like me and everybody else. So my door was a revolving door, and I always wanted it to be that way. It was, but for good or for bad, right? So everybody always had access, and everybody was always willing to come to me. And you deal with a lot of other things too, right? Like, hey, listen, like I can't pay for my car, so I can't come to work. And, so can I, get an advance on my check? And I think those are all good things that we help people when we can, but they're all distractions from the business too. But I think when you grow your business, versus an already established business, people grow with you, right? So you can't sort of say like, okay, well, when we were doing $15 million in revenue, you came to me because I was the end all be all. But, now that we're doing $25 million, you need to go to Susan, who's, head of HR, and you can't come to me with those problems, and I can't provide you with solutions. I think it's hard to do that. And I think it's hard for people. And I think you lose some credibility with people too, then saying like, I thought we had a relationship, I thought we, we're here for each other, and now I can't do that.
My complaint about employees always is, well, first of all, I don't like them. And some of them are my own kids, so that doesn't fare too well. I just don't like the idea of employees. I always didn't like the imbalance of one of your employees could come to you and say, Rudy, I'm putting in my 2-week notice. And typically you'd reply with, where are you going to? And they say, well, I'm going to a different industry altogether. I don't like, medicine anymore. And you say, well, congratulations on coming up with that goal for yourself. And if we can help you at all, let us know, and so on. So they have that option anytime. But if you were to call Sally in and say, hey, Sally, have a seat. You're doing a good job, but we just want to change a pace. We're going to let you go and bring Bobby in. It's the same thing.
Right.
You both put your 2 weeks in or whatever. You're going to pay him 2 weeks in this and that. But there's the onus on the business owner to be the stable one and to, always keep things going. But if you do that to the worker, it's legal, but it's chaos. It's social chaos.
Oh, yeah. Employees in this day and age truly, really have a lot of power, right? And we've created systems so that they're very protected. And our society's created systems, and our government's created systems so they're very protected. And depending on the state that you're in, they're more or less protected. But employees are very protected. And then they have the social ramifications of what they can do as well, right? You start going on Indeed or just going to Google and look at reviews. And if people leave sort of horrible reviews about you as a boss or as a company, it'll be very challenging for you to hire people, because they'll see those reviews and say, or Glassdoor. Even if that isn't the truth of the matter, it's almost like, when you leave a review on a restaurant, if that's, you can respond, and you can always say, well, there's two sides to the story, and but yes, I agree. It is challenging, and if somebody isn't performing, there's so much onus on the business to have you done all the things possible to make a space for them to be able to perform. I think that we live in a sort of a gig society. We talk about the Great Resignation, and I think a lot of people want to work when they want to work for however long they want to work. And generally, you can't really run a business like that, and then those people are all bent up when they go to Starbucks and it's closed at 3, because they don't have staffing. Well, so I don't know. I think it's an interesting time. The pandemic forced some different evolutionary things in business, but I don't know how. I don't know how pharmacy can become remote, and I think obviously there could be more automation coming, where e-scripts are coming in, and there's a robot that spits the medication out for you, that you put your ID in and put your fingerprint or eyes or whatever, and somebody remote checks that, because obviously we're already doing that. You're remotely checking prescriptions as well as the product. So, but then I think you're going to have a lot of legislative issues around that, where boards of pharmacy probably aren't going to get on board with that quickly. But I think ultimately that's where we'll probably end up. And I think that it's a lot of these developments are out of necessity, just like Zoom wasn't really a big deal until the pandemic. And then, Zoom was, had its, sort of moment in time.
Yeah, I hope pharmacy moves as quickly as it can, technology, and I hope that there's not, I'm not saying there is, but I'm hoping that there's not board members on the state boards that are business owners who are going to profit by slowing down technology somehow. I might be talking differently maybe if I was on the working side versus the ownership side, but I hope that things move along as quickly as they should technology-wise.
Well, I mean, I think that they're all not very pragmatic, right? Just like ratios, right? Like in certain states, they have ratios, and some states have no ratio as a pharmacist to technician. And then in some states, it's, well, if you have 2 certified, then you can have 2 non-certified in Massachusetts, right? And it's like, how do they come up with these things? How do they determine that I am only capable of managing 4 people? And if I go to Rhode Island, I'm capable of managing as many people as I want. So I think that there just needs to be some consistency. I think there needs to be some rationale behind some of these decisions as well, right? Because I think they're very limiting. And that was a challenge for my business. We're a big box long-term care pharmacy, and didn't necessarily always need that ratio was challenging, because we needed probably a lot more technicians to do the work that needed to get done than necessarily we had pharmacists. Now you're asking the business to carry an undue burden.
You've got a love for business. If you could have done it over, would you have not gone to pharmacy school, or was that a nice combination? Pharmacy sort of got you where you needed to be, and business was kind of on top of that.
I think I had looked at those different things. I think I liked the security that pharmacy had offered when I was in school. But the struggle that I had when I was in school is I wanted to do something different. And when back in 2000 and early 2000s, pharmacists really were just in a retail or a hospital environment for the most part. This big industry push wasn't really there. And then a buddy of mine that was a year ahead of me did the Rutgers Fellowship Program. Was like, you really should do this program because it's right up your alley, and it'll get you into a space where you want to do the things that you want to do, which is do something outside of those sort of 2 things. But to answer your question, I don't know what the alternate ending would have been, so I probably would just do what I already know worked well for me. But to your point, I love business, and I think that any business would be interesting. If I didn't end up going to pharmacy school, I think I would have probably built a very successful like landscaping company or something else, because it's just my desire and my passion. Just like I'm still building business now. Just I don't have to sprint, right? Because I've had an exit. So for me now, it's a little bit more enjoyable. But before, when I pretty much had everything on the line and borrowed a ton of money from the SBA and put everything into Hawk, it was more of a sprint for me versus a marathon. Like I had to work 13, 14 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, because I wanted the business to be successful. And then I wanted to be successful, right? There were things that I wanted to sort of accomplish for myself.
So right now, Rudy, you're doing some consulting and things like that. Are you ever going to get back into a product-based business, either an information product or a tangible product?
I might get back into the pharmacy business. I definitely see myself entering into a space with a tangible product at some point in time. I mean, I'm invested in a number of different business ventures and from an angel startup. I think that everything sort of has a product. I have a fairly good sized commercial real estate portfolio, and I think that is the product, right, for me. So when I look at those buildings, I look at each of those buildings as its own business, and I take the same approach to buying one of those buildings as I do in buying a business. So I look for opportunity that's undervalued. How do you increase rents? So could we fix the building because it's undervalued because it needs some work? Can we get a discount on the price because it needs some work? And can we build more buildings on the land that it's on? So I really look at any business sort of from that same fashion as like what's the upside potential and the opportunity. And I mean, the reason that I enjoy the real estate piece right now is because it doesn't require a tremendous amount of labor. So for this point in time where the labor market is difficult, we outsource the majority of major construction or things that need to be done. But I've got one or two guys that work for me that manage the properties and deal with small renovations and things of that nature, or tenant issues, which is a lot easier than 200 people. So I think that's what I enjoy about that business, is that there isn't a tremendous amount of infrastructure from a personnel standpoint.
It's always been kind of a hobby of mine to find the best processes for task management. Part of that, reading on it and certain programs and that for task management. And I talked to my friend and my brother and things like that. I'm like, what do you use for task management? They're like, nothing. I'm like, nothing? They said, no, but we've got like one customer. It's like, oh, I've got hundreds a day. That's the difference of it.
Right.
There's a blessing and a curse. In the old days, when you had a few hundred customers, whatever, that you're serving every day, that was great diversity because they were all individual payers. I'm talking back in the 70s. Now, of course, it's kind of a pain because you've got the work level of, let's say, a few hundred people a day. That work level is there, but the paying diversity is not there because you're looking at 3 or 4 different huge payers. So you've got the pain in the rear of multiple customer interactions. If you look at it negatively, you got the pain in the rear of that, but it's not a diversification because you only got 4 payers. So it's not a great situation.
No, I mean, I think it's not a great situation, but I think you can still make money doing it. I think it's also not a bad situation in the aspect that when you're negotiating your reimbursements, or whoever you work with to negotiate your reimbursements, you're not having to negotiate across 12 different players.
If you twist that the other way, the smaller number is nice, but I think negotiation is a stretch. I think you might want to say it's not as painful because you're only getting screwed by 4. You're only getting screwed by 4 companies instead of a dozen. Right. But the negotiation part is not really there.
Well, I think that there could be stronger negotiations. I think that's the other challenge too, especially on the retail front. I think that in the long-term care space, I think that the groups that are out there, MHA, GeriMed, Innovatix, I think maybe one other. I think they do a really good job of advocating with the PBMs. They do have leverage there with CMS and Med D because they have to have certain market share provided for, so that they have to. The PBMs need to work with them
because they have to have so many lives have to be Medicare covered, and thus they
correct.
Thus they say how does that work? If you lose us, then...
If Caremark doesn't contract with MHA, then they lose all of those pharmacies, and then they don't have a critical mass, right? So they can't go to CMS and say, we can be a provider. So I think that obviously there's leverage there that we don't have in a traditional commercial environment. But I think that the pendulum needs to swing back at some point, that we can, and I think the challenge also becomes that everybody's got their own carve-outs. There's so many different SCOs or, that you can join, or buying groups or whatnot, that it just doesn't work well, and we don't collaborate well together. So
yeah, there's so many different buying groups that it's almost like, let's say you have 20,000 independent pharmacies, and then there's I'm just joking, but let's say there's 10,000 buying groups. Every buying group has two pharmacies, and it's like, well, they don't have any power. You need to have a third of those pharmacies or something, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. No,
and I think that's like the horse is too far out of the barn, and I think that the long-term care space with PBMs is relatively new, right? I mean, it was 2000. 7, 8 was where CMS started paying for Med D came in.
Oh, because before that you didn't have many PBMs because it was private pay.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, if you were in an assisted living facility, if you're over 65, unless you had a pension, you had to pay cash, right? So it's a relatively new sort of space, and everybody could band together. And they could get it, but we're going back to the dawn of time about retail pharmacy. And so, yeah, to your point, there's so many group purchasing organizations, and we're sort of touting, all these different, things. I don't know. I think you have to really spend enough time on your own business and really find what's going to work for you. I really focused on buying when I owned my business, and I actually did it myself. Like I did the orders every single day, and I spent a lot of time on shopping all of my generics, and renegotiating my contracts on a very consistent basis, annually conservatively, if not earlier. I think that's the challenge with a lot of people's businesses, is that they sort of just set it and forget about all the other things that they should be looking at on a day-to-day basis, and revisiting those things. I mean, even your insurance, right? Whether it's your health insurance or your business insurance or your car insurance for your delivery cars. I mean, even personally for me, I put in my calendar that every year I'm going to shop all of those things. And I would do the same thing with my business. I would look at my P&L, and look at the top 15 expenses and say, okay, well, what am I going to do about trying to reduce those? What are my options? And I think that people forget about those things. And they're just like, okay, I'm here. We're making, why go out and get more revenue if you haven't optimized the revenue you already got?
Once in a while, there's relationships you have where the owner of that place is a customer still. Not too often, but like a local insurance guy or something. Those are on the bottom of my list of comparing. But all the other ones, even people that you think have a decent relationship with you, the sales person by name, and they come in once in a while and all that. It's like, well, are they a customer of yours? Probably not. So it's like, you might feel there's some closeness there, but the odds are they're not your customer.
Well, and people ask me that all the time. They're like, Rudy, what's the most important thing for you in, one of your vendors? And I'd be like, price. I don't care. Everything else to me, it's just about price. So I'd be like, that was the most important thing for me. I mean, service, yes, that's important. Get me the product when I'm supposed to have the product. All those things are important, but I can overlook a lot of that if I'm getting the right pricing. And I think that even supplies, like I would look at, buying of OTCs. We did a substantial amount of OTCs, and I don't forget about those things. I think that there is cost there.
If you could put into like 1 or 2 or 3 words why you're no longer at your big company, why you sold that, what is the one word to describe it?
I don't know. Fate. It was supposed to happen when it was supposed to happen. It was time. The business had grown to a point. I think I knew I wanted to take some chips off the table. There was an interest in the business. It was the right opportunity.
Divest a little bit.
Yeah. And it made sense to me. We had grown substantially. I knew we needed a significant investment in infrastructure to continue to grow the business. And so I thought that a professional organization could help me with that. Just overall, like restructuring the organization, management, infrastructure. And at that point, like everybody reported to me.
What was that infrastructure you needed?
Yeah, people. I needed a real people infrastructure business. I was always stressed, but it was at a point where there were just problems that I couldn't solve or I was struggling to solve. Like we didn't have enough people to do data entry, but I couldn't get enough people to do data entry. So how do I solve that problem?
How is that solved? Sometimes it's like you could almost triple the pay and you might not find somebody. Sometimes there's just not the right people there. So that's a rough situation to be in.
Well, and then also it's sort of the quality of the person too, right? Like some people can type, 25 scripts in an hour and some people can type 3, right? So, and you're paying them the same or, you don't know that until you hire them and you see how diligent they are or not. I think that we solved that by outsourcing to a remote company where they could data enter a lot of prescriptions.
That might have been a full-time job for you for, let's say, months trying to figure that out. You probably had so many challenges that if you had enough time on everything, you maybe could have built stuff. Yeah,
you're really going 90 miles an hour, right? As a business owner, even if you do have infrastructure, I think that you're still going there. And slowing that down is always hard. It was always hard for me anyway. I wanted to check the problems off the list. There was always like this list of things that need to get done. And the quicker I could solve one thing, I could move on to the next. And it was hard for me because I don't necessarily think that a lot of people could solve the problems for me. And maybe I was right or wrong. My expectations were really high. And I'm strategic and I'm always sort of critically thinking about things. And I spend a lot of time obsessing over them because truthfully, in the end, it's really my problem, right? Like, because if you work for me, it's not really your problem. Like, you're still going to get your paycheck. You're still going to come into the building. You don't really need to lose any sleep over it because it really isn't. If business is lost or customers are unhappy, it doesn't really end up affecting you.
I had an accountant years ago. This is 20 years ago. And we had some pretty good years in a row. And she had said, if you're going to give something to somebody, and we already had a profit sharing and stuff. She's like, if you want to give something to somebody, this would be a good year to do it. It's like, no, that's the ownership thing. They get paid whether things are down. It's like, I don't go to them. I don't go to them when years are down and say, you're going to take a cut. They just get the same. And so it's my profit to enjoy because there's enough times where it wasn't there or it's not going to be there in the future.
Right. And you're scraping by. So you gotta plug away when you can.
How long has it been since you sold your business?
I sold in 2018 and then I stayed on for a little while and I left in 2019.
Back in like 2017, if you were close to a mental illness, I'm not saying you were, but if you were close to something, what would it have been? Would it have been anxiety? Would it have been depression? Was everything happy-go-lucky and you sold it with just a little bit of stress? How would you describe how you were feeling as things were getting bigger?
Oh, I think I was always under a tremendous amount of pressure, self-induced and anxiety. And also there's all these other outside forces, board of pharmacy, you get inspections. We dealt with that compounding issue, NECC, back when I first bought the business. And, when you're filling 75,000 prescriptions a month, and if there is an error, you literally have to send to the board of pharmacies this ridiculous report of things that you may not even be able to answer, I think those were all sort of the stressful things. Staffing has always been a stressful thing. There's never enough people. It was never enough. I was always looking for us to try to be as perfect as possible. I never really accepted, we'll do better next time. And we would really try to promise the world, right? And that was important to me. But achieving those promises were challenging at times, especially when you have deliveries that are 3 hours away. And we try to get things out the door and expedite them. And 5 minutes later, something's coming up, going to that same location. You're sending another car right behind it. It was just a lot to manage. And I think people were sort of very siloed, and I was the top of the silo. I was the reason that things could run across departments, because I would be able to say, I need you to take this, type it, move it to processing quickly, get it to delivery. But I don't think that there was any, even after I exited the business, I don't think there was a captain that really understood that. And I think that was the challenge. And I think that was the entrepreneurial stuff, that when you bring in a person that's worked at just another corporation. And I learned that working for an independent. I learned those things when I left CVS and I started working for an independent pharmacy, and I didn't have canned reports, and I didn't have things that just showed up in my email to say, this is how many FTEs you have. And so I learned all of these things because I didn't have them, and I'd ask questions, and the owner of that business was like, well, you got to think about this, and you got to think about that, and you got to think down the road.
If fate didn't intervene and this buyer didn't come forward and so on, could you have pictured yourself mentally doing what you were doing until now? Or do you think there would have been something come up, maybe a heart attack, or maybe you walking out? Or could you picture you would just be stressed for another 5 years until 2023 or whatever?
Yeah, well, I didn't know a pandemic was coming. So if I did know that, I would have run for the hills, because I can only imagine how running that business would have been. Well, listen, I would have done what I had to do to keep running the business. I might have had to think about other ways to run the business. I might have had to think about looking at the business that we had and which is the most profitable business, and saying, we can't service this business, so we're going to cull the business that we can't service that's less profitable. I mean, there's probably a million different things that I might have had to have done, because if I can't service the business, I can't do it well, I'm not going to do a kind of a half-assed job for all of it. I'd rather do a great job and have half of it.
And then you're working on things that are positive for you, so you're cutting down some of that stress of some of the problems of the ones that you can't service well.
Right. Because, you're just getting complaints, right? And then those are difficult phone calls.
If you were an independent pharmacy owner right now and you sold without anything lined up, what would you personally do right now if you sold an independent pharmacy, but you didn't have your real estate lined up and things like that? What would your next few years of life look like for you?
I think the first thing I would do is I would take a little time to understand that you got to sort of put the anxiety at ease, because if you're running 90 miles an hour all the time, and then all of a sudden you have all of this time, I think you need to sort of build a new existence a little bit, right? So for me, I had to really, I was on the phone with people trying to line something up, I had to do something, when in reality is I didn't have to do anything, right? So instead of forcing it, which I think a lot of people I mean, and maybe people wouldn't. I mean, for me, I was like, all right, like what's next for me? I got to force this. I got to find something, like call everybody and network and, leverage. One of the things I would say is that take whatever it is that you receive for the transaction and figure out how you can leverage that into the next endeavor. Right. So I say that to a lot of people like, oh, if I had $1 million, I would do nothing. I'm like, well, that's like their goal. It's like, if I had $1 million, like, well, what would you do with $1 million? I watch Netflix all day. Like, like, is that the goal? Well, because that's not the goal to me. For me, it's if somebody gave me $1 million, it's like, how do I leverage that and turn it into $3 million or $5 million?
What would you do right now with $1 million? You just left your job. You have $1 million. You're not doing your current stuff yet. What would you do with that $1 million?
NASDAQ's down 30%. I'd put it into the market.
Put it there now. Yeah.
If I had money sitting on the sideline right now, I would dump it all.
Put it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would take a few months to really just settle into a new existence, right? Things that are important to you. For me, like fitness became important to me. I became part of a gym and I got a trainer that holds me accountable. Accountability is really important. I hold a lot of people accountable, but I still think that I need to be held accountable sometimes too. So I have a trainer that holds me accountable on diet and coming to the gym and my workouts, so whether I'm hungover or not, he's like, you got to get here and you got to work out, and the workout's always going to be hard. And because I'm still holding him accountable for my results.
So you take some time, don't think you have to jump in right away. What's some other advice?
Explore the things that come to you too, right? So what are the other opportunities that sort of start coming your way? And then what were the other things that you were interested in business that you really couldn't spend any time on? When
you say that, see what opportunities come your way, it's like if I were to drop out of my pharmacy right now, I don't know if things would like come my way. I mean, they haven't for 25 years. Maybe the word gets out that you're not there anymore. How does it just get out?
I think you have to put a little energy into it too, right? And I think you have to look at things that maybe were interesting to you that you didn't necessarily have time to explore or focus on.
Maybe don't jump at them the first day, but putting your feelers out at least, looking things up, putting your name here, do this or that. That doesn't mean you're going to jump into that, but that helps to then let people know you're out there.
Right. Just for me, for example, like I enjoyed real estate, right? And I had a couple residential places when I was younger, and I don't like residential. I realized that very quickly that I don't like residential. So I exited that residential space, and I was dabbling in the commercial space even when I owned the business. And then I just said, and actually it was really only in the past year and a half or so that I was like, I really want to ramp up and make this sort of my next enterprise. Like I want to have this very large portfolio of commercial real estate. I had already had the person working for me. I took it to the next level and acquired equipment. So now I have a mini excavator and a skid steer and take on bigger projects. And it's sort of just applying the same principles to that business, now to a different business. And I was interested in how do I invest in companies and like how does it start? So then I joined an angel investment group, and then I don't really even do much investing with them anymore because I met a bunch of people through that group. So now when a deal is very interesting or looks very promising, they just call me and then we get on a call and I invest directly. So I think you have to be looking for those things, and I think you have to know what it is that you want. I mean, a lot of people like, look, and I think it all depends on your personality too, right? If you're like, I am burnt, I am spent, I want to do nothing, but I don't know, man, like I can spend a week in the Bahamas, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life on a beach drinking margaritas. Like, I think that's just boring. And I don't think really people want to really do that.
That's what I say about myself. Since I was a kid, I was in the business. And so I'd say it was, 42 years or something like that, 30 some years as a pharmacist. And I'm very careful to say, I don't have any idea what I want after retirement. I know what I want to do the first week. I want to go to the Bahamas or something like that. But I don't know what my mind is going to do. I might need some stimulation and need this or that. So I'm wise enough to know I'm not going to make too many plans about my retirement because I just don't know.
Humans are always wanting to be progressing, right? Like that's important for us to always be progressing, right? Whether in our society, personally. So I think that if you're a business owner, I've met some people that are very content, golfing 3 times a week with their buddies. But they also have other things too. I think that, maybe they're invested in the stock market and they do that themselves, or they'll, spend a lot of time with their grandkids. So I think that there's other things that you have to find engagement in. For me, I've never really enjoyed sports very much, and I'm not great at them, but business has always been my sport, and I like to be the best at it, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the race. I enjoy getting the business. I enjoy watching the P&L grow. I enjoy how do I make more EBITDA from current revenue. There's lots of things I really enjoy about business, and for me, it's exciting. I enjoyed working those hours when I could see the results, right? Or if we say, hey, listen, we're going to get this new agency coming on board and there's 50 patients, then I run numbers, like theoretically, I'll be like, okay, or, what is that each patient typically worth? And what does that mean to our top line? What does that mean to our bottom line? And I'm an ops guy, so I'd be running ops and strategy, like, okay, we need to hire this many people, and like, what drugs are they on? Let's make sure we have those drugs in stock. Let's order that stuff in advance. Or, okay, well, that's a really good reimbursement drug. That's chlorpromazine. I know that MedD Caremark pays really well for that. That'll be really good for us. I enjoyed all the granular details.
I think my problem right now is those things always made the other things of ownership palatable, because it's like, well, if I'm having these ideas and I have this freedom to do these cool things, I'm not going to do it alone, and I'm not going to do it as an employee somewhere. I'm going to do it, and I'm probably going to have employees, and that's the price I'm going to pay for these dreams. And I think, I hate to say it, but a lot of the positive things aren't there because you get slapped around by the PBMs. And I know that there's positive things, but they take some work, But it just seems that right now, I think employees are a pain because I don't have anything fun / profitable balancing that out.
Look, it's really hard to make a good amount of money. It's really hard, right? And I get where you're at, which is it's a grind, and you're not showing up in a Lambo, right? And I think pharmacy is a hard business to be in as an independent person, and it's been hard for quite some time, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult.
If people came in when my dad was in the business, you making 40%, it's all what you're comparing it to.
Right. It's all, but the relative period in time that you're comparing it to. And then there's, to that end, there's some people that we talked about this a little, that, for me, it wasn't that I wouldn't want to deal with all of sort of the headaches and stuff to make $120,000 on running my own business. I think there are people that are, hey, at least I don't have to answer somebody. I can own my own pharmacy. I can make $120,000 or whatever that number is. And that makes them content too. So I think success is not always clearly defined. I think success is different for everybody. And I think success in different aspects of people's lives as well. So, you could be like, well, I think if you ask people, what is success, or are you successful? And I would say, in what aspect? In business, in my life, personally, relationships, parenting. Like what is it that you think success is? And we're in a very sort of regulated business, and the walls are sort of closing in on the box, right? And I think there are going to be new opportunities coming shortly. I think over the next 10 years, there's going to be a significant decrease in population. There's going to be there's already studies done. I read a study about all of this. So it's going to be very, very challenging, I think, for big businesses to continue running at the way that they are running. So I think then they'll be creating these spaces for pharmacists to start businesses and be successful, for grocery stores to be independently owned, and for them to there'll be this margin space in between where these big boxes can't perform and people are just not happy with them. And I also think that you're going to see consolidation. So I think you're going to see that instead of having a CVS on every corner, you're going to have those locations closed and you'll have a big large box CVS where people will go from many, many towns and cities to that CVS, and then they'll have obviously significantly more pharmacists and technicians and staffing working there in automation. But it'll be a big box versus a CVS on every corner.
Why do you think that they're not going to be able to continue to be strong?
Well, I think they're going to have trouble staffing. I think they're going to have these big staffing problems. And they're not going to be able to create solutions to them. I mean, the Starbucks can't create solutions to these problems. Like, you can't. So I don't see how CVS and Walgreens and Costco and Walmart are going to create all of these solutions either. So then I think then that equals an opportunity for, a Mike or Rudy to open a business and say, I'm going to hire 5 people and I'm going to pay them pretty well. And they're going to want to be here because they deal with me every day and I deal with a lot of the problems. And so I think that those opportunities will exist. And I think our culture is continuing to move down that road, right? Like people like farm to table and independently operated businesses, and they feel like there's a better quality. So I think that we'll continue to see that trend go there. But the next 10 years is going to be very, very interesting, especially around the baby boomers that aren't in the workplace anymore, and people aren't having children as readily as they were, and so I think that there's going to be a lot of challenges. I think there's going to be a lot of expectations that people have, just in the same that we currently do, right? Like I don't really want to work, but I want to be able to get my coffee. So, but who's gonna make the coffee?
It's not like they happen overnight. You remember McDonald's, when they'd say, pull ahead and we'll bring out your something, and then they never come out. You know what I mean? So it's like,
right. Yeah.
You don't want to pull ahead because you're going to get forgotten about. So then they have these new things where you pull up to the curb and you punch in what your curb number is, on the sign. I'm 18, you put your order in, and then they're going to come out. I did that half a year ago. And I just sat there and like 10, 12 minutes went by. And it's the first time I actually drove away without my fast food. It wasn't worth it to me to say, hey, you owe me $5 because you didn't bring this out in time. So that's going to be trouble too, because you don't go from many employees and then use technology. Let's say you got 50 of whatever, and technology is going to get you down to 20 of whatever people, let's say 50 and 20, the need for humans. But to get to that 20 from that 50, you have to go to about 70, to do it right, to get the right people in there. And so there's going to be a lot of struggles with that.
Yeah, no, I think companies across the board are going to struggle. And I think that there's going to be technology and automation and AI and all sorts of stuff that's going to come into play. But there are going to be some businesses that are just tactile in nature that can't do without people, period. End of story, right? I mean, that's especially businesses that deal with people that have disabilities or people that are geriatric, right? I mean, if you have an 85-year-old walking into a hospital, they can't check themselves in a lot of times, right? Like they don't know how to navigate those systems, or they're hearing impaired, or vision's impaired. So I think there's just going to be businesses that have to have people engaged, and I don't know what that looks like.
I was traveling with my brother-in-law, and we went to pick our car up, and some of these you can do it on your phone, but this company, you had to go up and my brother-in-law showing his phone screen to some old guy behind the counter that they brought in, post-COVID or something. He couldn't see or hear. He's trying to read my brother-in-law's phone across the counter so he can type something into his computer. And it was just an interaction that did not have to happen. And those are ones where we get rid of the humans, thankfully, but there's a lot that are still going to have that human touch to them.
Yeah, no. And it's nice to sort of sit on the sidelines and watch. I don't really usually get too bent up about me not being able to get my coffee and stuff. But I also think that it'd be very, very challenging to live it, right? And I think the difference between an entrepreneur and owner, or somebody that's owned a business versus somebody that is an employee, and maybe, and these are sort of generalized statements. So if I, as an entrepreneur and previous owner, and even when I wasn't an owner and I worked for somebody, I acted as if I was an owner of that business. So if you hired me today and said, you're the CEO of this business, I would live and breathe that business. I wouldn't just be able to turn it off. And I think that's the challenge in working with people myself, is that when I had people coming into my business that were highly compensated, or, for them to be like, well, I'm shutting it down. It's 5:00. I'm heading home. And, whether it's the world is ending or not, and even when I had sort of taken some chips off the table, I still was so engaged in my business that it was very hard for me to just be like, well, I took the majority of my stake out, so I'm not really worried about how, this performs. I mean, I wanted to go to the next level. I wanted this thing to grow and be successful, and I took everything, to heart and personally. And I would just be the same now if I started another business. I'm the same with everything that I do. It's just the sort of passion I bring to things. And even when I work with people, I have to figure out how to dial it back, because I can't drag you to the finish line, So I have to be able to figure out what's going to work for you and how much do you really want, because, it's not my business.
I get burned out at the pharmacy sometimes, but I know I still have that entrepreneurial bug in me. And that's, I guess, part of the reason for the podcast. But I want to keep building something. Well, that's part of my structure here is I haven't monetized this, but it's building something with 0 employees. That'd be a dream, an entrepreneur without employees. Something without employees is maybe that's just retirement.
Maybe that is.
Hey, Rudy, what a pleasure meeting you and talking to you.
Mike, this was awesome. I really appreciate your time. I hope that it was helpful, and I hope that it was engaging, and
oh, for sure.
Maybe some nuggets that somebody takes away that helps them in their business.
For sure. Thanks for all you're doing for the profession, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.